Hi, I'm David Slawson. This is the first garden that I built back in 1974 at the Cleveland Botanical Garden. Take a look up the hillside here at this dry cascade. I fondly remember gathering these beach pebbles on the shore of Lake Erie and actually placing them all by hand. Of course, the rocks themselves were set with a crane. The one here at the base, which is really the largest rock, weighs about 8 tons. I went and got this rock with a flatbed truck and a tripod that I had built. My goal in this film is to demonstrate that Japanese garden design can be adapted to any region, any climate, any garden site, any situation. This art form is flexible and powerful. Europe gave the world classical music, and composers from around the world then stretched it and opened new creative avenues of expression. Japan has given the world a comparable gift in the realm of landscape art, a set of universal principles for making gardens that are both inspiring and soothing, and can capture the essence of any landscape, whether a woodland stream, a hillside meadow, or national park vista. The Japanese created gardens in inland Kyoto to remind them of their beloved mountain streams, lakes, and seashore. We can use these same tools to create gardens that capture the essence of our favorite scenic places. If you visited national parks, you know what it feels like to be surrounded by stunning natural beauty. But even if you haven't, you've likely played in a woods, a field, or a ditch with some weeds and grasses. Imagine having the experience of a beautiful natural landscape in your own yard. Every ecosystem on Earth offers places of beauty worthy of recreating in the garden, so the possibilities are endless. What you need are the aesthetic tools, imagination, and a skilled garden maker, preferably all combined in one. The clients who asked me to design a garden in Fayetteville, Arkansas, loved a natural woodland stream and took me there to see it. They wanted me to recreate the feeling of the stream behind their ranch-style home. How does a landscape garden maker recreate the variations of a woodland stream in a strip of land 20 feet wide and 70 feet long? Reduce the scene down to its essence to capture the feeling of the place. As the 11th century Japanese garden manual Sakuteki states, in the case of a man-made landscape garden, only the attractive and best parts of natural scenery are studied and modeled after. As I directed their placement, I let the inherent qualities of the rocks do the work of shaping the geology of the stream. I used rocks with stepped edges and convex shapes to project out into the stream, and concave shapes to create inlets and coves. I planted low shrubbery around the backs of some of the rocks to suggest upland hills, and carpets of ground cover to suggest valleys and hillside fields. I vary the shapes, sizes, and spacing of the rocks to create interest, and use rocks of similar geological type to unify the composition. My job as landscape artist is to recreate the experience, not the actual measurements. After setting the rocks, I select the plants and place them to mimic the way they are found in nature. One of the striking differences between Japanese gardens and most Western gardens is the Japanese use of plants to evoke their habitat in nature versus the Western use of plants purely for their decorative qualities. A plant's special beauty comes fully alive in the context of its habitat. In this northwestern Arkansas garden, the client used natives like redbud, ironwood, beech, and red cedar, along with non-natives like hemlock and Japanese maple. Every region has its own plant palette, which can be used to evoke the desired landscape experience. To enjoy the garden scene from inside the house, the client decided to replace a solid wall and fireplace in the area left of the middle post with a 6-foot by 10-foot plate glass window. This living room view continues to the right in a band of windows above the kitchen counter. Such picture window framing brings the outside in and makes viewers feel intimately connected with the garden. Notice that the site rises as a wooded hillside behind the house, a perfect fit with the woodland stream theme. The design context provides the landscape artist with 3 important sources of inspiration and guidance, which I call the accord triangle. The first thing I look at is the nature of the site and surroundings. Then I find out what the client wants. Third, I get my inspiration from locally available rocks and plants. The creative process is not something that goes on in the landscape artist's head, detached from the world. After getting to know the design context, I look for inspiration in the natural world, in gardens of past masters, and in other art forms like landscape painting and photography. Note that the fragmented basalt, visible right of the natural falls, is what produces the braiding of the water. The stream crossing is a threshold into a special world of natural beauty, yet one that is completely at home on its site. You could recreate such a scene on a backyard canvas, 100 feet wide by 300 feet deep, or even smaller. Note how the path disappears into a fold in the meadow. This device makes the unseen part of the path feel more remote, increasing the sense of depth. The sloping sides and wide base of these shoreline rocks make them appear solidly anchored in the underlying bedrock, and echo the wide sloping shapes of the mountains in the distance. The simplest, most basic forms and relationships have the most power, but are often overlooked. You can zoom in on a distant scene by capturing it up close in the foreground, as this Rocky Coast vignette does. The tree is a shore pine, an Oregon native. I hope you see how landscape experiences that inspire you can inspire your garden. This Lake Superior island off the Ontario coast might serve as inspiration for an upper Midwest garden, with spruce and firs pruned to mimic how they are shaped by their habitat. One of the keys to this island's character is the way the treetops rise to a peak left of center. To recreate this effect, use spire-shaped conifers of varying heights, then prune to accentuate their character. On each of the next 7 slides, you'll read a phrase from the 15th century Japanese garden manual, Illustrations for Designing Mountain, Water, and Hillside Field Landscapes. By enumerating the habitats which various plants make their home, this passage serves as the basis for what I call the principle of natural habitat for using plants, and its counterpart, principle of geological formation, for using rocks to emulate the way they are found in nature. I added the desert ecosystem to the habitats in the manual. They have sand dunes in Japan, but no desert. But with cities like Tucson and Phoenix, millions of us do live in the desert. And landscape designers are beginning to use native rocks and plants to evoke desert landscapes. The spruce backdrop screens out buildings in the distance and is pruned to evoke a mountain ridge. At the tops, where the main growth occurs, competing vertical leaders are pruned back to horizontal and diagonal side branches to create a windswept feeling and maintain the desired height. Bilateral symmetry, like that of the Taj Mahal, is a powerful device for focusing our attention on a single focal point, but its static balance can feel rigid and confining. Asymmetry, with its easy flow and elements unevenly sized and spaced, feels restful, uplifting, and invites lingering contemplation. Flying out of Minneapolis, after viewing the Carlton Garden site, I was struck by the undulating shoreline of the Minnesota River and knew it would inspire my design. Back home, I took this inspiration to the next level, making it part of a meaningful landscape. I sited the garden so the existing arborvitae trees serve as a natural backdrop. Stepping stones lead the eye from the viewing shelter to a wide, flat-topped viewing stone at the front edge of the gravel river. Keep this rock in mind when we discuss foregrounding later in this chapter. The viewing shelter offers a cozy refuge so visitors can relax and fully enjoy the garden scene. What kind of landscape is this? A view across a frozen lake? A farmer's field with a band of hills in the distance? Even after seeing the two-lane road in summer, it's hard to shake our perception of a frozen lake or field when viewing the snow scene. Our mind's interpretation of the snow scene overrides evidence of a road lying beneath the snow. Just like viewing a painting, when the garden artist creates effective patterns, our mind will fill in the rest. Good design maximizes the assets of the site by making them part of a unified composition. Notice how the garden artist, Kinsaku Nakane, planted a band of mixed trees in the middle ground to connect the garden with the lower flank of the mountain. It's hard to believe there's a road running between the two. Framing and foregrounding are closely related techniques for setting off the view and for linking architecture and garden. Here, an Arizona cypress serves as a natural frame for Cathedral Mountain in Sedona. We feel safe when viewing from a protected overlook like this one in Hocking Hills, Ohio, much like our earliest ancestors did on the African savanna. This sense of security frees us to enjoy the beauty of the landscape. You can recreate this effect with a room or viewing shelter looking out on the garden. Sliding glass doors and fixed picture windows are the most common framing devices and will never go out of style. The clean lines and simplicity of the frame free the mind to enjoy the view. Get to know the subtle changes of your climate zone and choose plants to recreate that experience. A large foreground rock tricks the eyes into believing the distant rocks are similar in size and look so much smaller because they are so far away. Try blocking out the foreground rock with your hand and see how the perspective changes. This softly rounded foreground rock plays the same role. It grounds us and says, this is the place from which to view the scene. This dramatic foreground element plays several roles. First, like the other examples of foregrounding, it magnifies the distant scene's illusion of scale. Second, its horizontal top echoes the veranda, and its natural shape ties in with the garden. Third, it functions as a water basin. Right and left garden edges play several roles. They embrace the viewer, lead the eye into the composition, and screen out unwanted views, so it seems the garden is part of a larger landscape. These two examples happen to be for the right side. I'd like to illustrate the interpretive range of this landscape art with two gardens of my own. The first is at Garvin Woodland Gardens in Hot Springs, Arkansas. The typical response to a land cut like this is a retaining wall, which solves for practical concerns like erosion, but ignores or downplays the human need for beauty and connection with nature. This photo, taken from the same place, shows how native rocks and plants bordering a stream can play several roles. They solve erosion and drainage issues and create a landscape far more engaging than a retaining wall. This scene greets visitors as they walk toward the entrance to the Welcome Center. It also attracts frogs and crayfish, insects and birds. This garden pool and falls are located at the head of the stream directly across from the entry. Note how the large foreground rock grounds the viewer and sets off the scene, increasing the sense of scale. Stepping stones lead our feet to the edge of the pond and our eyes to the waterfall. These two cliff rocks are set 2 feet apart to create a gorge channeling the stream. I felt that such extraordinary rocks, found on a wooded hillside near Hot Springs, must be given a leading role in the entry garden. And yet they must feel like an integral part of the rockwork and terrain, and not stick out and say, "Look at me." Note how the vertical fissures of the two rocks are aligned, so they appear to be part of the same formation. Such simple techniques rely on observation of nature and the qualities of available materials. Downstream from the Welcome Center, a pair of waterfalls in the 4-acre Garden of the Pine Wind serves as another example of how characteristics of the site can shape the design. The lower left drawing shows how I placed the slot in the weirs for the two waterfalls close to the left bank to reflect the topography of the eroded drainage valley, steeply sloping on the left and much more gently sloping on the right, because that's where the water would naturally flow. It's always better to listen to what the site is telling us rather than impose preconceived ideas. That's why the best design is created in response to the site, not at a drawing board. The same is true for rocks. I made the rough sketch at the upper right to visualize how I would use available rocks for the upper falls. The entire composition builds in response to the principal rock, second from left, which also anchors the left side of the waterfall. This instruction from the 11th century garden manual, Sakuteki, gives us a simple, effective method for setting rocks in an organic composition, reflecting geological processes. On the right is the completed design. This is the second phase of a garden I made at a church in western Kentucky. The need for an area for people to gather for events like weddings and ice cream socials led to my spiral galaxy idea. Users of the garden have observed that no matter what kind of event takes place here, they feel a sense of tranquility, soothed by the patterns of nature. The spiral galaxy is an intimate space that reminds us that our planet was born of swirling stardust, and we are part of the vast universe. A local stonemason laid the flagstone in the center spiral and the wall that rises from left to right at the rear. The wall is a comfortable place to sit and reflect, whether alone or with a friend. Set in a wood of post oaks and hickories, the garden responds to and heightens the existing natural environment of its site. A spiral galaxy might seem a stretch, but it shows how our source of inspiration can come from any natural phenomenon. It's just one more example of how freely Japanese garden principles can be interpreted. The most moving, deeply satisfying landscape gardens don't come from our heads, but come through our heart and senses, from our experiences in the natural world. A woodland path might follow a stream cascading around a natural stone basin. A change in grade on the site may suggest a waterfall or a rocky coast. A winding river viewed from the air might inspire a meandering garden stream. The way a tree trunk leans out over a boulder may suggest a river scene. We can fine-tune our vision to fit the nature of the site so it looks as if it grew there naturally. If the landscape experience we create positively affects people's lives, then there's likely to be a sufficiently strong commitment to its ongoing care. Good gardens can become great gardens if well maintained and improved over time, not just for decades, but for centuries.